Thank you for tuning in to HardNews TV. I'm your host, Terry Lynn, and this is the channel where truth is like poetry, and sometimes people just can't handle it. Today is October 29th, 1984. I'm just kidding. It's 2016, but this article makes me think it's 1984. Y'all ready for it? Out of WND from yesterday. Feds plan to force vaccinations. Force vaccinations. 1984. You don't have a right. Are y'all ready for this? A public interest legal team has filed comments with the federal government objecting. This says comments. It should be complaints, in my opinion. A public interest legal team has filed comments with the federal government objecting to a planned Center for Disease Control rule change that would allow the government to impose forced vaccinations on Americans under certain circumstances. First of all, I want to show y'all the word. It says a public interest legal team has filed comments. But am I wrong? Shouldn't that word say complaints? But let's read it again. A public interest legal team has filed comments with the federal government objecting to a planned Center for Disease Control rule change that would allow the federal government to impose forced vaccinations on Americans under certain circumstances. It'll be at their discretion. Maybe the initial time that forced vaccinations might be a legitimately feasible situation. But then if precedent is set, then they can arbitrarily force you to take whatever damn medicine in your body that the federal government deems that you need to take. Aaron Marcino, senior legal counsel for the Great Lakes Justice Center, explained, this proposed rule is an abuse of power under the pretext of protecting public safety. The government increasingly acts without constitutional authority, thereby undermining good governance under the rule of law. The proposal from the CDC comes in the context of defining government power to act against individuals in the case of an outbreak in a communicable disease. But the Great Lakes Justice Center contends the proposed rule reaches far beyond the CDC's ability to quarantine a person with a serious disease such as Ebola by expanding the quarantine regulations to encompass all communicable diseases. Overreach. The grant of permission for forcibly vaccinating individuals comes in its definitions, the CLJC said. Under agreement, the CDC states HHS CDC is proposing a definition for agreement which refers to an agreement entered into between the CDC and an individual expressing agreement between the parties that the individual will observe public health measures authorized under the part as the CDC considers reasonably necessary to protect the public's health, including quarantine, isolation, conditional release, medical examination, hospitalization, vaccinations, and treatment. Let's stop. It's an agreement that other people are going to make that we don't even have a right to make in this. And it says, as the CDC considers reasonably necessary. Reasonably necessary. Well, guess what? To a liberal and to a conservative, that is a very subjective term. Reasonably necessary. A conservative and a liberal are going to have vastly different opinions on what that definition is. And if Bill Clinton can argue when he was being investigated for the Monica Lewinsky scandal, when he says It depends on what the meaning of is. And he wants to fight over the definition of a simple word like is. And it depends on what the meaning of the word is. What a way to argue. If he can argue that point, then lawyers need to be fighting this point, whatever the CDC considers reasonably necessary to protect the public's health, including quarantine, isolation, conditional release, medical examinations, hospitalizations, vaccinations, and treatments. Okay? So this gives the CDC permission to do quarantines and isolations. What if you're not really even sick? What if it's just It continues, CDC may enter into agreement with an individual upon such times as the CDC considers to be reasonably necessary, indicating that the individual consents to any of the public health measures authored under this part, including quarantine, isolation, conditional release, medical examination, hospitalization, and vaccinations, provided that the individual's consent shall not be considered as prerequisite to the exercise of any authority under part. Here's the help you'll need to prepare your household for the realities of living under a centralized health care system. Okay? I want all of y'all to go back to like my first week that I made videos, like 2 or 3 months ago. Go all in my archives and find my video that I wrote, my concerns and why every American should be scared to death of. I think it's called Why Every American Should Be Scared to Death Over Universal Health Care. And I discuss point by point what I see, the dangers of universal health care. Y'all need to go see that. It's very bad. The GLJC is concerned that the proposed rule requires forced medical treatment and vaccination of the detained individual without consent. Authorities could come just pick you up and say that you've been exposed to a disease, and they can take you in quarantine or isolation and give you treatment without your consent. Go see my video, Why Every American Should Be Scared to Death Over Universal Health Care. It forbids an individual from objecting to forced medical treatment and vaccinations for any reason. Any, A-N-Y, for any reason. Now right now, because I have an autistic son, all through school, I took the what do you call it? I took the exemption to get out from having him vaccinated. Ever since he was diagnosed with autism at 3 years old, I did the religious, clause that I did not want him to be vaccinated. And every year I had to turn in a letter to the school board that he was not going to be vaccinated. That was my moral conviction, my religious conviction, my psychological convictions, that he would not be vaccinated. And so I had to file, in accordance with law, blah, blah, blah. I was an objector to it under the law. There were clauses that you can legally object to having your kid vaccinated. And you research it for your state, and then you write the letter to the school board that in compliance with this law, you're not going to, vaccinate your kid. But this says it forbids any individual from objecting to forced medical treatment and vaccinations for any reason, and at the threat of criminal prosecution and fines up to $100,000. So if you object It forbids an individual from objecting to forced medical treatment and vaccinations for any reason. Forced medical treatment. Sterilizations, hysterectomies, anything. Forced medical treatment. Put you on antidepressants, put you on Haldol, put you on stuff that gets you out of your mind. Without consent, you won't be in control of your own body anymore. Go see my video. I explained it a couple of years ago, and I posted the video when I started this channel. The green agenda can be accomplished under universal health care. That when an insurer has insured an object, the object has no rights. And that's what universal health care is leading to. If I'm an insurance company and I insure my phone, okay, I'm insuring the phone. I can't make any changes to this phone without getting permission from the insurance company. If I own a house on the National Register, I can't make any changes to it because I don't really have permission to do it. If I go buy my car outside, if I go put aftermarket parts on it and I get in a wreck, my insurance is not going to cover all the aftermarket parts because they are only going to cover what is needed to be covered. And so the person who owns the vehicle, who insures the vehicle, has more rights than the person who owns it. Like if I wanted to drop my insurance because I can't afford it, the bank is going to make me carry insurance. I have less rights over my vehicle than the insurance company. And when the government owns your body, just like the U.S. military is considered property of the U.S. government, the Army cannot refuse to take any vaccinations or any shots. When they go overseas into war zones, they have to get their shots. They can't opt out of it. They belong to the government. The government tells you you will get your shots, and they have to. And so that's what's going to happen to us under universal health care. They can dictate under universal health care how many kids that you can have because you'll be too big of a burden on society if you have more than one kid. Or let's say that they want to completely do away with pregnancies, forced abortions. And you won't have a right to say, no, I want to keep my baby. No, you're too big of a burden on the government and we're going to force abortion. They can do euthanasia. If you've got a fatal disease, a terminal disease, the government can say, we're not going to pay for your coverage. We're going to let you die. We're going to bring in, counselors and euthanize you. And we're going to do death by dignity. And you're going to have, quality of life. We're going to make sure that you don't suffer. So then they can force euthanasia. I mean, there's so many. They can force what foods you will be allowed to eat. They'll say you can't eat these fatty foods or these sugary foods because it puts your health at risk and we don't want to cover your medical bills. So go see that video. It will blow y'all's mind. So we just read, we're almost through with the article. It says that it forbids an individual from objecting to forced medical treatments and vaccinations for any reason at the threat of criminal prosecution, prison, and fines up to $100,000. The Rumor Has It website, Snoops posted a long article and tried to debunk the claim. But Snoops admitted a 1944 law already grants the U.S. government the power to take necessary measures, including the apprehension of individuals, in order to prevent the spread of communicable diseases. In its definition, the CDC allows for such agreement with individuals indicating consent to quarantine, isolation, continual release, medical examination, hospitalization, vaccination, and treatment. The definition continues, provided that the individual's consent shall not be considered as a prerequisite to the exercise of any authority. The Great Lakes Center said the proposed rule tramples our due process rights our civil liberties, violates religious freedoms, invades personal privacy, and hijacks bodily autonomy. Y'all, it goes on and on and on. It's a very long article. I still got 3 pages to read. But I just wanted to bring this to y'all. Please stay tuned. We are definitely entering into 1984. Stay tuned. I have more to come. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.